Hi, welcome to this presentation about COVID-19 and adjunct therapies for prevention and phase 1 infection. We will be posting this so it can be viewed later, and we're glad you could join us today. I got some questions about why I'm doing this. I was asked to present on this because there's many people at my church that have been interested in what they can do to optimize their immune system. And I've seen many patients in the hospital who I've taken care of who have gotten well enough to go home. They're well enough to be discharged. However, they've had some irreversible consequences that have happened as a result of being infected with COVID. And many of them ended up in ICU, intubated. One gentleman had blood clots, and then later on in his stay, he had hemorrhaging. And by the time he was well enough to be discharged home, he couldn't walk anymore. And as I talk to these patients, the theme that I see is they've been at home for quite a number of days, quarantine as they should after they've been testing positive. And they hadn't really been doing anything at home, just kind of waiting it out essentially, until it progresses to the point where they need oxygen, and then they're admitted to the hospital. Some of them even came to the hospital before they needed oxygen, seeking treatment. Without the need for oxygen, they're typically not admitted to the hospital unless they have some other comorbidity or some other disease process that would warrant admission. But they're at home doing nothing other than waiting it out. And many of these hospitalizations could be prevented. And if the hospitalization itself couldn't be prevented, at least some of the major complications that occurred once they were in the hospital could have been avoided by treating the disease earlier when they're at home with many of these adjunct therapies that will lessen the severity of illness and the duration of the illness. So with that being said, we'll get right into it. I hope this is helpful for everyone. And again, it should be helpful. We're focusing specifically on the prevention part of it, as well as the phase 1 infection part of it. And we'll go through what the phases are. So there'll be a little more clarity on that. I will start by sharing this here. So this is going to be a 2-part series. So in the first part, we're going to look at some definitions briefly, just to understand exactly what we're talking about. We're going to talk about 4 things that are actually happening with the SARS CoV-2 infection. We're going to be talking about the immune system, the various parts of the immune system, and focusing in on the innate part of the immune system, enhancing and optimizing that part to lower the severity of the infection, lower the severity of the disease, and diminish, shorten the course of illness. And then the big part is all of these adjunct therapies, the things that you can do on your own at home to produce your chances of having a better outcome, to make those chances higher. So the one thing I will say, as we go through these 3 things, a little bit about the infection, the immune system, and the therapies, this is by no means a comprehensive review of what's happening. This is a very condensed version in about 40 minutes of what I've learned over the past 18 months or so as I've been working in the hospital setting where I'm exposed to COVID patients, and I wanted to enhance my knowledge of what I can do to better position myself to be in the category of people that if I get COVID, I would have a less severe course of illness. And So this is just a very condensed version of what I know, and I certainly don't know everything that there is to know. I know a very small piece. However, what this is it is very effective, and we don't have to know everything if we know some of the most effective things. And when I was working on compiling this, I actually did come down with COVID, tested positive, and the course of my wife was also sick at the same time. Our course of illness, or the severity of our illness, was very short. We were sick for about 3 days with a lot of the major symptoms, and then the fatigue lasted about a week. But I only needed to take, I was off work for 3 or 4 days, and after a week, I was back to work. I don't have what's called long haulers, if you're familiar with that, where you have symptoms that continue to persist after the disease. And the severity of our disease was, in the spectrum of things, very minor. We didn't have to go to the hospital. We didn't have to take any medications. So these things can be very powerful if they're combined together and utilized early on in the infection, or early on in the course of the disease, when you first have symptoms, or even when you first have just one symptom. So my hope in doing this is that people will have more tools, and that this irrational fear level of COVID will be replaced with a healthy respect of COVID, and a healthy respect for the amazing power of the immune system that we're all created with. And as we replace that fear of COVID with a healthy respect for it, and a healthy respect for these remedies, then we all will be able to better face the next challenge, whatever that is, and especially the next pandemic, whatever that is, or even the next variant. As we hear over the last couple of days, the new variant, the Omicron, I believe it's called, coming out of South Africa. So these adjunct therapies will only become more important with time. The reason that they will be more important with time is we're already hearing about this additional variant. It's apparently 30 times, not 30 times, but 30 has apparently 30 differences or 30 mutations on the protein itself, on the virus itself, compared to some of the other variants like the Delta variant and the original COVID-19 virus. So with the new variants coming, also, this is not the first pandemic we've had. It's not going to be the last that we had. If you remember, a few years ago, it was Ebola. Ebola was a big thing, and there was before that, there was the early 2000s. There was the SARS epidemic, also caused by a coronavirus. So you will need to use these again, and these aren't just, some of the studies that we're going to look at are specific to COVID, but these therapies in general, when you understand the principles and how it helps optimize and support your body's immune system, you will understand that they're not just limited to being effective with just SARS CoV-2. So the other reasons that they will become more important with time, I believe, is a lot of these therapies that we're going to talk about, they are not cost prohibitive for people, meaning they're very accessible. The other thing is they're not dependent on the supply chain. We saw many supply chain issues over the last year and a half. These therapies aren't dependent on the supply chain, or they're largely independent of the supply chain. When we talk about the nutraceuticals, those obviously, to get some of the vitamins, you do need to you do need to utilize the supply chain to get those. However, that's not the only source you can get what we're going to be talking about. The other reason that these will be more important with time is when a new pandemic arises or when a new variant arises, there is a space in time where things like therapies like the vaccine are not readily available. We had to wait quite a few months for the vaccine to become available with this SARS CoV-2 pandemic, and even then, that time frame was the shortest that a vaccine has become available from research to market. So we really shortened that time down more than we ever have before. However, there's still that time frame where people are getting infected, people are getting hospitalized, people are dying, and we can be utilizing these therapies in that interim time. Same thing with the new variant coming out. There's going to be time before the research, the different phases, the manufacturing, and the distribution of a vaccine for the new variants, or even the boosters. There's been time waiting for the boosters. So these therapies are independent of that. There's no time that needs to be wasted sitting around waiting. We can start implementing these right away from the get-go with the pandemic, and also right away from the get-go of having symptoms personally. So those are a few of the reasons that these are only going to become more important with time. And with that being said, we will jump right into some of the definitions. The focus of this talk on the immune system aspect is the innate immune system, the innate part of the immune system, and we will go over the other parts. They're very dependent. They work together. They are not separate, independent, functioning systems. They're all part of the immune system. However, the innate part of the immune system is the part that has been largely left out of the conversation, and it's where one of the most it's the most untapped part of your immune system that can be enhanced with these things that have been studied in the medical literature, have been published. Many of them have gone through randomized controlled trials, looking at the effectiveness of either specifically with COVID or with your immune system in general. However, they're not well known. They're not talked about often, and that is the aim here today, to help us all utilize these more. So with that being said, definitions, we've talked about SARS, SARS-CoV-1, SARS-CoV-2. So what is SARS? Severe acute respiratory syndrome. And we mentioned earlier, back in the 2002-ish, 2003-ish, there was the SARS pandemic. And as we review just briefly a little bit about what that was, SARS was the disease caused by the virus. The virus was named SARS-CoV-1. So fast forwarding to today, the disease now we're calling COVID-19, and the virus causing the disease, the COVID-19 disease, is SARS-CoV-2. So they're both a coronavirus. They both have some similarities, but from a molecular standpoint or protein viral standpoint, the similarities are about 70% similar. So there's about a 30% difference between the SARS-CoV-1 and the SARS-CoV-2. As we look at the studies, it's going to be using the term SARS-CoV-2, and that's just referring to the virus that's caused COVID-19. So I just thought that was worth mentioning, so we don't get kind of lost in the jargon and the specifics of the naming aspect of things when we look at some of these. So moving on to some of the key points, some of the 4 key things that I'm going to speak on in regards to what's happening during the infection is the greater virulence that it has because of interferon suppression. We call this novel coronavirus, and one of the reasons it's called novel was because they said it's new. And while coronavirus itself is not new, the virulence is at a higher level. It has more functionality with infecting you and causing you to be sick. And the new aspect of it is, like I said, it's about 30% different from the SARS CoV-1. So in that sense, that's why it was called the novel virus. And what's actually happening though in your body when that takes place is interferon suppression. What is interferon? Interferon is part of what your immune system produces to interfere with a virus replicating in your body, in your cells when you become infected. Interferon is what we call a cytokine. A cytokine is just a group of proteins that have many different functions, really. I'm going to pull up another page for us here. If I can get back to the meeting controls. So we already talked about SARS and what that means. So the interferon suppression is what is occurring, which is one of the reasons why COVID is worse than COVID's in the past. Coronavirus is very common. However, my understanding is not all of them has this interferon suppression aspect to it. So that's one of the things that is making this more significant and much more of a threat. So this was an article, type 1, type 2 interferon responses in SARS CoV-2 infection. And this is in the Experimental and Molecular Medicine Journal. Basically, what this was looking at was the interferon being suppressed. Delayed but exaggerated type 1 interferon response can exacerbate inflammation and contribute to severe progression of COVID-19. So it's not only that the interferon production is being suppressed, it's being suppressed, but then it actually is no longer fully suppressed and has a delayed response to where your body is then producing it in a delayed time frame and in an exaggerated manner. So your immune system is on steroids, so to speak. Not necessarily, because the steroids would actually dampen the immune system effect, but your immune system is having an unregulated response too late in the infection phases or in the infection game. And this is important because what happens when you don't have that interferon, the viral replication is not interfered with. Thus, the viral replication is happening much faster, at a much faster rate than it normally would if your immune system was responding in the way that it normally would be responding. So the other thing this talks about, some of the interferon is also involved in much of the communication that happens between the different players of your immune system. And we're not going to get into all that, but this is part of what that is. But the sensing that there's a virus there, and then cascading effect of producing the right things. Interferon is involved in that. So you get some inhibition of your immune system communicating with other parts of your immune system. So not only is the virus not inhibited directly by the interferon, but the interferon communicating with other parts of your immune system, other players of your immune system is dampened down. So evasion of the innate immune receptor mediated viral sensing. Again, this goes into way more detail than we have time to, but the one thing that I was going to highlight is the suppression of the ISG functions. The inhibitory effects only work within the virus infected cells, in which viral proteins present the cytoplasm, present in the cytoplasm, not in the non-infected innate immune cells, such as the monocytes and T cells. So what that means is, you say we have two cells, one is infected with the coronavirus, SARS CoV-2, one is not. The interferon suppression is happening in the cells that are infected. So the cells that are infected are producing at a much faster rate more and more viruses. The virus is replicating much faster. And once that cell dies and the viruses have been released, the other cells that were not currently infected, they are still producing some of that interferon, and then they're not necessarily overwhelmed, but they're presented with this much higher viral load than they would have been if the viral replication was slowed down in the cell. And so then there's an overreaction by the other part of the immune system, and that is called the cytokine storm. We talked about interferon being a cytokine, and the cytokines are different proteins that serve a number of different functions in messaging and messaging different parts of your immune system and having it work in an optimized way, working in concert with all the parts and having everything happen at the right time. So when that happens, the immune response is ramped up, and it's happening later on than it should. It should have happened at a more regulated level earlier on in the infection. And this shows a little bit of what is happening. So we have the severity of illness. We have the time course here. So as time goes on, let me see. Okay, there we go. As time is going on here, you have the viral response phase. And so stage one would be early infection, when the virus is presenting in your body, presenting to the cells, presenting its spike protein to the cell, injecting the RNA into the cell that causes the cell to then produce more virus. The stage two would be the pulmonary phase, where your lungs start to get involved. The viral response phase is going down, and the host inflammatory response, meaning that part of your immune system where it's producing the interferon, now at a more unregulated rate, or basically it's doing it at too high of a rate. It starts to have too much inflammation in your body. You get the hyperinflammation phase, which is phase 3, also called the cytokine storm. And you can see this is after you've had shortness of breath, after abnormal chest x-rays and so forth. So the back here, when you get things like a dry cough, fever, this is the time when we want to be implementing these key remedies because of what's happening with the interferon suppression and the delayed response of what the immune system should be doing. So your immune system needs some help, basically. It's more important. If your immune system was functioning optimally, these remedies would possibly be less important because your immune system could handle it. But in this case, it can't. So another graphic here from a different study, if we can get out of, change windows here. So this is another table. I'm just gonna have to get rid of these marks here. So again, we have on the bottom of this chart, we have the axis that's showing time, day 0 symptom onset, 7, 14, 21, 30 days. So as we're progressing through the infection, this infection course, you have the viral proliferation. We talked about how that is happening with really an unbridled proliferation in the virus. You start to have overstimulated immune system response, and you have the cytokine storm or cytokine injury. That's where pneumonia starts to occur. And then beyond that, you start to have cytokines are proteins. And so if you have a cytokine storm, if you have a huge amount of proteins circulating around in your blood, your blood it's thicker, and that's the simplest way to put it. It's thicker, and eventually, if this progresses without treatment, you'll have strokes, you'll have clots, thrombosis, pulmonary embolism, and that's when death happens. So in these later stages, where there's the cytokine injury, where someone needs oxygen, where there's the risk of blood clots, this part, 14, so forth, 14 days or so, that is really when, that's obviously the part that you want to avoid. But if you're in the hospital, that's when you can be prescribed steroids, and steroids have an immunosuppressive effect. And the reason why, on the surface, it seems like you would want to stimulate your immune system to fight the infection, but that's just not the case, because the infection is not what actually is killing people. It's this cytokine storm and the clots and all the associated problems that come with that ill-regulated immune system. So the steroids that are prescribed are to dampen down that immune system response, so it doesn't end up killing you. The virus, the infection itself, is really what triggers the immune system response. As any infection triggers an immune system response, but the difference between SARS CoV-2 is that it's delaying the response and then triggering a much higher, much larger response of your immune system in such a way that it's actually injurious to the body. So that gives you a little idea of what is happening in the infection. And we talked about the cytokine storm. We talked about the 3 phases of the infection, and really the simplest way to review the 3 phases are based on symptoms. Phase 1 would be symptomatic without requiring oxygen, supplemental oxygen. Phase 2 would be you are requiring, your lungs are so impacted that you need supplemental oxygen to keep your oxygenation saturation above 92%. And phase 3 would be your lungs are so involved that they're not ventilating, and you need more than just supplemental oxygen. You require mechanical ventilation and intubation. So you would be in the ICU at that point. So phase 1 is you're not needing oxygen yet, but you have all these other symptoms. So the reason why we're focusing this whole talk is focused on prevention and phase 1 infection. Phase 1 is the time when, for those of you who have had COVID, who have tested positive, you've probably been told to go home, quarantine, drink plenty of fluids, get plenty of rest, maybe take a fever reducer, and just kind of wait it out. And that's what I was told when I went and I tested positive. Now, thankfully, I knew all of these other things to do, and I didn't wait it out. I made a phone call on the way home, and I had people coming over to help me implement some of these treatments, and or I should say therapies. Now, so we've reviewed the 3 phases. The infection anatomy, the thing to speak in regards to that is the virus itself. The spike proteins are specifically attaching to the ACE receptors. Those ACE receptors are most prevalent in 2 anatomical areas of your body, and that would be your lungs, which is why that's where the infection typically is. The other place in your body you don't really get infected, so to speak, but you might have some symptoms, and that is your bowels. The ACE receptors are most present on the cells in your bowels and your lungs. So because the ACE receptors are very prevalent in your bowels, that's why some of the symptoms of COVID infection is diarrhea, and that is one of your body's mechanical, so to speak, defenses against this infection. So if you are encountering, if your gut and your immune system encounters the virus and it's in your bowels, it's going to make you start to have diarrhea, so you can get that virus out, as much virus out as possible, because that's as much as you get out, that's that many less viruses that are going to be attaching to your cells and replicating. So that's that's one of your body's natural ways of decreasing the viral load that your body has to process and that your body has to fight on a more physiological level. So the reason that we want to understand where the infection is occurring is because this will help inform where are we directing some of these remedies, especially with the heat therapy remedies that we're going to talk about. Where are we directing the heat? Why is it effective? And in the lungs, I look at many chest x-rays, not for the purposes of the COVID infection, but as I'm looking at them for vascular access reasons, I also see the consolidations in the chest x-rays from patients who are COVID positive. And the consolidations, meaning where the infection is, the location of the infection is in the outer parts and the distal, outer, lower parts of the lungs. Not just the lower, but the most frontwards part and the most backwards part, so the outer parts of your lungs. If you think of your lungs as an orange, the infection would be occurring maybe in the peel, the orange peel layer. Not necessarily, the infection wouldn't be consolidating as much in the inside part of the lungs or the inside part of the orange. It's that outer layer. And the reason why that's important is we can really we can get to it easier with heat than if it was deeper in the lungs. So just something of note to keep in mind as we move forward and talk about the heat therapy part. So we're going to move on and talk about the immune system now. We've covered a lot so far. I'm going to try to condense this part down. We're going to wrap up part one, and in part two, we're going to actually get into the optimal additional therapies. We're going to look at a lot of the research studies on what's effective. So the immune system, it has multiple different parts, multiple arms, you could say, of the immune system. We're not going to go over all of them. We're going to be focusing on the innate part of the immune system. But it is worth briefly mentioning some of the main parts: the structural, the mechanical part, or the mucosal part. That would include, like what we talked about a little bit earlier, where your body would have diarrhea if you were exposed to virus in your GI tract. So that would be more the mechanical things that happen. Cough is more of a mechanical thing to get some of the stuff out. The innate part of your immune system is much more physiological. So is the active part, the much more physiological. The innate part of your immune system is non-specific, meaning it's not the part that has antibodies. Now, the innate part and the active part work so closely together. One can't really function optimally or 100% without the other, because they are all involved. However, the innate part is it's the first responder of the immune system. Again, it's the most underutilized. It's been left out of the conversation, and that's what we're going to focus on today: optimizing the innate part of the immune system. As we optimize the innate part, it also has benefits for the active part of the immune system and the structural mechanical part, but we don't really have time to cover all of that. What happens with the innate part of your immune system, one of the key things is when it identifies a virus or a pathogen, it encapsulates it, builds a wall around it essentially, and then kills it, and then comes and cleans it up and gets rid of the evidence. And this is happening many micro areas in your body, in the area that is being affected, in the area of transmission, or the area that it's been exposed to. And that whole process that I described of building the wall around it, killing it, cleaning it up, taking the garbage out, that whole process is very complex. It also requires some essential things, vitamins, things like that. We'll talk about that when we get to the part about nutraceutical profile and so forth. But vitamin C, things that we already know about, like vitamin C. But that is the innate part, is what we're going to focus on now. The active part of the immune system is the part that could be said to be more antigen specific, meaning it's more specific to the little spike protein that would be on the virus. So the active part of the immune system involves the antibodies. It also involves not just the antibodies, but it involves memory T cells. Memory T cells can create certain types of antibodies that if you're exposed a second time, the memory T cell knows what to make. It may make 10,000 antibodies per minute, and you could be exposed to a huge viral load and not even get sick, because you're able to produce that many antibodies per minute on a second exposure to something that you've already been exposed to. But not the case with a first exposure. With a first exposure, it takes much more steps to take place for you to start making the IgG antibodies to help neutralize the the spike protein on the virus. And spike protein is what connects to the ACE receptors. It's like the key that unlocks the door, the ACE receptor being the door, to let the RNA get in the cell. So the RNA is the instructions that it gives the cell to replicate or to produce another virus. Not a new one, but an additional SARS CoV-2 virus. So the active part of the immune system is also the part of the immune system that the vaccine is operative in. The mRNA vaccines have that instructions in them that cause your cell to make that specific antibody to that particular spike protein. The other part of your immune system, which we're not going to spend a lot of time on this, but it's very worth mentioning. The spirituality part of the immune system is very important. There's one of my favorite books here is the Handbook of Religion and Health that was published by Oxford University Press. There's thousands of studies about the link between religion and health, and there's a few chapters dedicated to the immune system in there. The key link between your immune system and better immune function with the spirituality or with the religion aspect is the stress cortisol immune system suppression pathway, you could call it. The more stress someone has, the higher the cortisol levels can be. Cortisol is well known to have a suppression of the immune system. The link between spirituality and health, or religion and health, is that people who are enhancing the quality aspects of their spirituality, of truth, self-sacrificing love, things along those lines, engaging in religion practices that are uplifting and that are giving them encouragement. Those things give them that much more effective tools in managing the stress, and thus lowering the cortisol and keeping it at a level that does not suppress their immune system. So they have actual physiological benefits from that. So that part, in my opinion, is a very important part of the immune system. So we talked about how we're going to focus on the innate part. So phase one, interferon suppression in phase one, leading to the uninhibited viral replication. I've said that before, but this is the physiology of the infection and the physiology of your immune system that underpins everything we're going to talk about regarding phase one therapies and utilizing these therapies early, as soon as possible in phase one, and some of these even before you get sick. Some of these you can do in a more mild manner, incorporate them into your daily routine. Some of them aren't going to take you any more time to do, and they will help optimize that innate part of your immune system. So if and when you are exposed, you have higher chances of being in the group that has a short duration of illness and a lower severity of illness. With that being said, the next part is the actual therapies themselves, and we will do that in part two. I hope you have learned something new, and I look forward to sharing the actual therapies themselves in our next session. And with that, we will conclude the recording. So once again, thank you for joining us for part one of SARS CoV-2 adjunct therapies for prevention and phase one infection. In this talk, we just looked at some of the things that are happening during an infection of COVID-19 and some of the things that your immune system is dealing with. We looked at the different parts of your immune system. And in part 2, we will start covering those additional therapies, those adjunct therapies that are so effective when they're combined together. And they can really help you decrease the chance of even knowing that you've come down with COVID, because they can put you in that category of people that maybe you're infected and you get sick, you have a sniffle, and that's about it. Now, that's not the case with everyone. There's many healthy people that I see in the ICU, in the hospital, that have COVID, otherwise healthy. However, when you look at their lifestyle, you start, when you know all of these principles and you look at some of the things that they are doing with their lifestyle, or these therapies that they weren't necessarily doing, it makes sense why they've ended up in the hospital, because they didn't have knowledge to position themselves in a way, or position their immune system in a way to give them the best chance of a best outcome. So join us for part 2. We will get into those therapies. Thank you.